through a summer where people are taking offence at words and sometimes, deliberately misunderstanding them as this criticism of when Labour people called on Jeremy Corbyn to call off the dogs in order to avoid engaging with the substance. And the substance of that article by Boris Johnson on the Mail on Sunday was that we've got ourselves into a position where essentially the European Union is demanding almost a veto over the constitutional arrangements of the United Kingdom. They say either you stay within a customs union with Northern Ireland or, you won't be allowed to leave. And could you use more moderate language for people not to engage? In case of Boris, he usually could notch what he says down by one thing, but to then go overboard, as Alan Duncan did, the most disgusting thing he's heard, just avoids the substance of the debate. And there's a tendency of this happening generally right now, and I just wish people would go back and being offended by policy proposals rather than by words.
Well, yes, but there's a lot of offence being taken. As you mentioned that phrase about calling off the attack dogs, and again, a phrase used by Shukran Munna, the former Shadow Business Secretary, over the weekend. Many on the left taking offence at this, apparently, even though many of those, the likes of Owen Jones, had actually used this phrase themselves. And again, it's not actually calling people dogs in the same way that when we say it's raining cats and dogs, we don't literally mean there are cats and dogs falling from the sky. We do seem to have lost the ability to understand basic English in the last few years in this country. But in terms of what Shukran Munna had to say, do you believe that the Labour Party is now, you were MP for many years, is now an institutionally racist party?
Well, it's strange because I was thinking about this and I thought this is almost the other extreme of our failure to have the right language. I think there are some conflicts if we, for example, were to take Kashmir, the Labour Party is perfectly capable of bridging two different views on this. I think in terms of what we, bringing MPs in, really good. But when it comes to, now under the current leadership, when it comes to anti-Semitism, when it comes to our attitudes towards Russia, there seems to be a blind spot, and it seems to have more to do with a particular worldview and their apparent inability to understand that, anti-Semitism is something exceptionally serious. It's almost as if they've forgotten their history. So probably institutional racist was the best word Chuka could find, but it shows something deeply, deeply flawed.
And let's talk about what there's a big meeting tonight. Jeremy Corbyn is going to be addressing his parliamentary Labour Party. Do you think there are going to be angry scenes there? Or because we have seen, obviously, Frank Field has walked away from the party, although not the party membership. There are many other MPs apparently talking about leaving. I've been talking to some very sort of senior figures in the party who said, there's big battle, this sort of existential battle going on about do we stay in the party and fight or maybe just hold out until the Corbynista wave is over and then take the party back, or do we start another party, or do we sit independently until Jeremy Corbyn is gone, if he ever is ousted? There is a massive battle about what they should be doing. Where do you think this is going to lead?
I really don't think anybody can predict that, because what has happened is that there aren't any historic precedents. The party was deeply divided in 1983, but it was along kind of ideological lines. But this time it goes further. The Labour Party used to be able to deal with dissent. I mean, I remember after Gordon Brown didn't call the election he should have called, I wrote a scathing article in the Evening Standard criticising the leadership. And essentially, other party members sort of talked to me and saying, well, look, is that really the way forward? Whereas now, the minute you express any disagreement with the front bench, people accuse you of all sorts of things, these kinds of votes of no confidence in particular areas in the constituencies. We've become so illiberal, and that just isn't good for democracy.
Well, you say it's not good for democracy, but I mean, let's talk about other aspects of what's good for democracy. The TUC over the weekend have announced the results of a YouGov poll of the biggest unions, Unison, Unite and GMB, which they say is very accurate. This is not self-selecting Remainers who are just putting their votes forward, but a representative of the ordinary views of ordinary members of those major unions. And they say they are fully in support of holding a second referendum. There's a lot of movement now, a lot of pressure pressure on the Labour leadership to start a full-on open support for a second referendum. We've certainly seen the line loosening and changing a little bit. Some hints from the likes of John McDonnell and others that might be something that would change. Although Jeremy Corbyn, of course, staunch, lifelong Eurosceptic, has tried to rule that out. Do you think that there is going to be a move in the coming days or weeks or months for there to be full-on official Labour Party support for a second referendum?
Well, again, these are battles over really something else. So the Labour leadership, I think, at the moment is weighing up what would be better to go for, a second referendum, and I think that quite a number in the leadership think trying to force a general election is by far more effective in terms of the opposition. But in terms of the second referendum, just rewind this slightly. Ordinary people had a people's vote 2 years ago, and over 17 million voted to leave. The phrasing and framing of the second referendum question now is kind of not giving you real alternatives. It just says, if it's not good for workers and for your jobs, do you want to have a say? And it doesn't tell you what what will happen if you get the same results again, or do you call another general election? They're creating a mood music, and I think it's that failure to implement the first people's vote, which is going to lead a lot of people saying, well, if you ask me for my vote and then there are no consequences to it, what's the point of voting? And that's what I think is bad for democracy.
Do you think realistically we are going to have that second referendum? There was some analysis done last week that suggested that actually the time has now passed for actually just a physical timetable of getting legislation in to have a referendum, have a campaign and get that in. And actually you wouldn't be able to hold one now until the day before the date that we actually leave the EU, in which case it would be meaningless.
Yes, and that just sort of underpins the point of that this call for the second referendum actually is about something else. It's about people wanting to make the process of leaving appear so difficult that people just give in and settle for whatever deal there is. Or some of them want to just revert the decision. But the practicalities of a second referendum, given that we have a fixed date for leaving, and also, Juliet, always remember that the European Union elections in next year. So even Brussels doesn't want to go into a new team to do the negotiating and a new European Parliament. It isn't really about people make a decision. It's about undermining the current status quo.